Good morning. My name is Aaron Hunt, the principal here at VirtLaw. This is the first of our video blogs we're going to be doing, hopefully one of very many. I needed a good topic for the first one. We thought about doing something on blockchain, but that's sort of been done to death recently. We will do it at some point soon because there's a lot of misinformation out there about blockchain and what it is, how it works, and how it could be used in the future. But it wasn't quite something fun enough to do for our first video blog. With yesterday's launch by SpaceX of the Falcon Heavy rocket, sending a Tesla Roadster off into space, we thought, well, this is something on space law. Now, personally, I am a big fan of anything of that sort of sciencey space knowledge and what's going on there. I'm wearing a SpaceX t-shirt just to show that I do really love this stuff. And we also had a few weeks ago, of course, Rocketlab launching a rocket out of New Zealand, which is where I'm based, which was brilliant in that it was locally produced. It's the first private launch pad. The rest of them are all basically government owned. And New Zealand became the 11th country into space, which is pretty fantastic for a country of 4 million people. So we thought, well, let's do something that might cover topics that people have a little bit of interest in but might not really know the law behind, or where the law could be going in these areas, or problems that might pop up. So yeah, we thought we'd do something on this. So we'll start off with, what is space? I'm not going to say it's this sort of empty round area, because that's just ridiculous. But there needs to be some sort of definition, because all the law relates about what's in outer space, what's in space, what's on the planet, that sort of thing. There is no real set definition. As with most laws that involve things and with multiple countries, unless the countries agree on what something means, it really comes down to what the court decides on the day. There is generally a belief that space begins at the point where an object can hold an orbit. So you put something up into space, it can hold that orbit and go around the world, or sit there in orbit with the world, then that's the point where space begins, and that's called the Kármán line. It's about 100 kilometers from Earth, so generally we can think about 100 kilometers away from the planet is where outer space begins. Now think about it, 100 kilometers isn't actually that far. We've got a planet that spans tens of thousands of kilometers in width. 100 kilometers, you're talking a tiny distance. You think about where you live now, 100 kilometers away. I'm in Auckland, 100 kilometers, about an hour or so drive away, and that's actually not that far compared to the size of the world. So whenever you see these diagrams of here's the planet and here's the satellites revolving around it, they're kind of not really to scale. It should be sort of, here's the planet, here's the satellite revolving around it, not somewhere out here. There are some other satellites that do orbit much further out. Some that like 800,000-900,000 kilometers out. Depending on the size of the satellite and whether it's supposed to be geostationary or moving around the place, it all sort of varies. But still, that first Kármán line where it holds orbit at 100 kilometers out, not very far. Now, of course, the first place you think that with international law it's going to come from the UN, and it very much has in this case. The UN started a thing called the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or COPUOS. Now, this was created in 1959. And New Zealand asked to join in 2016. So quite recently, we haven't been admitted yet, I don't think. At this time of this video, we haven't. But it shouldn't be far off now that we're a space-going nation. The COPUOS have created 5 treaties, and I will go through each of them very quickly. They are quite important. 1 or 2 aren't so much. First one came out in October 1967, is when it became bound the first countries. New Zealand joined next year at 1968. It's the Outer Space Treaty. It's about the exploration of outer space, the moon, and other celestial bodies. It outlaid that there was no ownership of celestial space, so no ownership of outer space. There's no country that can say we own this portion of space, or we own this area around the moon, or this area around the asteroid belt. So if you've ever bought a bit of land on the moon, you've been scammed. Sorry, but you can't own parts of the moon or Mars or anywhere else. It also banned weapons of mass destruction from going into space, but didn't ban conventional weapons. So it means no nuclear weapons in space. But it didn't mean that you couldn't have other things in there. And of course, during the space race, there was a lot of talk about who's putting up what in case they need to have a space fight or to attack the Earth. But of course, it's all very much secrecy. Boeing has had a ship up there. The last few years. It was originally developed by NASA, but the DARPA took it over while it was being developed. It's called the X-37B. It's basically a miniature shuttle. The shuttle was a fairly large craft. They could fit 2 of these X-37Bs within the shuttle hangar. So the shuttle could have opened up and released 2 of those. That was the original plan, but then the shuttle was scrapped. Now the X-37B, its payloads are about 2 meters by 1.2 meters. It's 7 by 4 foot in size. So it's not a great payload, but enough to put up a satellite of a certain size or experiments of some type. Now the Air Force, who now control this, have labelled it as being top secret, have provided a little bit of details of what it's doing up there, but most of the payloads have remained top secret. They said there's no weapons being transported, so there's no weapons up there. So they say there's not. Now, but there has been some ongoing experiments, but they won't say what those experiments are. Except for they're testing future spacecraft designs, which typically you'd think would be a NASA thing to do, but because the Air Force can do it as well. Now, it's been up to 4 missions so far that's been successful. First in April 2010. Each one lasting longer than the previous one. The 4th one was 714 days in length, so basically 2 years in length. It's now on its 5th mission, launched in September 2017, and we don't know when it will be back or what it's doing. But you can go online to sites that will track it and can show you where it's currently sitting. So it's basically, I think it does something, then it sits into its own orbit, and it sits there for a while until it's required again. The next treaty, the Rescue Agreement, December 68, now that required that a country was to notify the country of origin for anyone who's stuck in space and the UN General Secretary if there's someone in trouble in space. Not so much requirement to help them directly. There is a requirement that if someone or equipment was to land in your country, you are to return it to the country of origin. You can also charge them for the return of the object, not the person. So if an object was crashed in your area, they want it back, you can charge them the cost of returning it back to them, but not returning the person. So that's going to be on your head. Not so much a big issue. You have to provide search and rescue if they're lost near you. So if you did have someone who was in distress off your coast, then you have a requirement to go there and try and help them out. There is one little issue with the Act, though, in that it doesn't define astronauts. It defines personnel of the spacecraft. Now, which is great because that means that people like SpaceX, if they send up crew up there, will be covered. Virgin Galactica will be covered. However, will that cover the passengers, the paying passenger, the tourists, someone who's up there who's not personnel of the spacecraft but happens to be on the spacecraft? That isn't so clear. But I can't honestly see a country holding on to them or not helping them out when required. So I think it's going to be one of those sorts of legal issues which shouldn't really cause a problem. Next one, liability convention. This is an interesting one. This came in 1972. It's liability for damage caused by your equipment. So basically, if you send up a satellite or a spacecraft hits another satellite and it damages it, then you are liable for that damage. Same with the craft or something came down onto the Earth and hit the Earth, damage results, you're liable for the damage. It's only been used once, and that was with the Cosmos 954 satellite, nuclear fuel satellite that crashed into Canada. This is back in I think it was the late 70s. Now, the Australian government did once fine the US for littering when Skylab came down to Australia. So they didn't really use this convention. They could have, but they decided to use something else, littering, which is great, littering from space. There is one issue with that, is that it must be state to state. So a private person can't sue a country for damage that they've experienced. Same way that a country can't sue a private company for damage that's experienced under this convention. The way that they've gone about this, try to fix this issue, at least for the being sued part, is that some countries bring in legislation which has the company that's looking at launching indemnify the government. So in New Zealand, December last year, they brought in law so that if something launched from New Zealand, went into space, caused damage, or came back down, caused damage, and because it has to be state to state, the country that received damage sued the New Zealand government. then the company that launched from New Zealand will be indemnifying the country for those costs. So if they got sued, then New Zealand would pay them. The company would pay New Zealand back as to what New Zealand was sued for. Next one, Registration Convention, 1976. New Zealand joined 23rd of January 2018. So actually 2 days after Rocketlab launched their satellites into the sky, which included the Humanity Star. If you haven't seen the Humanity Star, go and Google it, see when it's invisible from where you are. I get my first view of it in a few weeks' time. So it's been sort of a 30-day wait to be able to see it. It's the brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon. It is a lot less bright than the sun and moon. They are major celestial bodies, but it'll still be brighter than any other star up there. And it's going around the Earth all the time for the next year or so. Now, under the convention, there's a need to register any object that is to orbit the Earth. So it's about satellites, things that are orbiting around the Earth. There was also a need to register flights that came actually in through a general resolution in 1962. So that was already covered back when the space race was on. Now, in New Zealand, the Rocketlab, who did their awesome launch of the Mahia Peninsula, they actually had to get approval from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of Space Transportation. Now, because it didn't launch out of the US, it didn't go over the US. However, Rocketlab is classified as a US company, probably for financial investment reasons. And we see that in a number of US publications that refer to this US company. They're still Kiwi to us. But they are launching out of course, Mahia on New Zealand's North Island, out on the east coast. Now, it is the first private launch site in the world. It's right next to the ocean, much like the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And this is so that the craft can launch over the water. So anything happens, it explodes, it has problems, the shrapnel will come down into the water. And generally rockets don't go straight up. They will sort of start straight and flatten out as they achieve orbit. So that's what will happen with Rocketlab and Mahia. They will be launching out of Mahia and then going up and angling out over the Pacific Ocean. Now, that legislation that came through in December last year also required that companies register for a launch license before they launch and create penalties if they fail to do so, which is going to be fairly unlikely. Final treaty is the Moon Treaty. Now, this was done to better define what can be done on the Moon and on other celestial bodies. So it's not just the Moon, it's basically the Moon, Mars, asteroids, basically anything that's out in outer space that we didn't put there. It's based on the idea that any action taken should be for the betterment of mankind, not for that one country taking the action or the company taking the action. It hasn't been signed by any space-going nation. Now, there's 11 11 countries have been to space. New Zealand's number 11. The other 10 also haven't signed, so I can't see this going anywhere. I think basically it's down to that if someone wants to go into space, they can mine an asteroid, then they're going to go and mine an asteroid. They aren't going to sign a treaty to say they're not going to do it, and that's the way of the world. There's also a treaty which is separate from COPUOS that prevents nuclear testing in space. It also covers water and in the air and underwater, but for us, space is the important one. It doesn't ban nuclear power in space. So that's two different things. Don't forget that nuclear power and nuclear weapons are two very different things. And there's a number of satellites and, of course, the Mars rover, which are nuclear powered. As a side note on nuclear batteries, 2015, NASA said they only had enough plutonium-238 to make another 3 batteries of the type that's used in the Mars rover, because the Mars rover is powered by a nuclear battery, and it's basically a big lump of something that's giving off a whole lot of stuff, and it's heating up, and that's how it works. So that explain that science to you. Plutonium-238 was created during the Cold War. It's not a pretty thing to make. It's not easy to make, and it has a lot of bad side effects when you're making it. It effectively was a side effect. So there's no real plan to make more of it. So as of 3 years ago, there's only enough left to make 3 more batteries. However, NASA think they may have found something new to make nuclear batteries from, so there's still a possibility there that they'll make more, which hopefully they can, because it makes these things work a lot better. There is one other convention which was an interesting one, but I wasn't actually aware of it until recently. It's the Convention on Program Carrying Signals by Satellite. This is effectively about copyright and preventing a satellite feed from hitting another country. So, the best place to say is that those living in Canada, along the US border, will often probably get US TV, which will probably be the newer shows, maybe more TV channels than they get in Canada. But there's a requirement under this convention to prevent that happening. So you shouldn't be beaming signals that carry a video feed into countries that aren't your own. Now, it's been signed by only a few countries, notably the US, of course. I'm sure they were the ones who probably started it. Australia has signed, which was interesting because Australia hasn't really got anything near it. So they can sign it fairly easily. New Zealand hasn't signed. Again, not much near us. There's probably no benefit in signing it. And honestly, I think the whole idea of trying to block these things at borders is just a bit old-fashioned. So there is no owning of land or sky in space, but you can the property that's in there. So you send something up that is your property, or the property of your person that paid you to put it up if it's a satellite. So if you put a craft on Mars, the land it's sitting on can't be owned, but the craft itself is owned. This is brilliantly depicted in the movie The Martian. If you haven't seen it, I won't give anything away. But the main character commits what he calls piracy, which is when he effectively goes and hijacks a vehicle on Mars. Now, I like talking about things that are theoretical, things that might come about, and it could be decades before it does come about, or it can never happen. But these are things they're issues which could cause problems in the future, and people will have to think about at some point. This one here's been thought about to a degree in science side, but not sort of the legal side. Probably not require the legal side yet, but I still like hypothesizing. And it's that time and space itself will create problems. And one problem is the idea with time periods and dates. Now, you'll remember that, if you've ever seen Star Trek, a movie, Captain Kirk likes using his star date when he talks about into his captain's log. And the star date is supposed to relate to a particular date and time they can calculate from this star date. And the idea that why Gene Roddenberry did this was because time is relative. And where you are, how you're traveling, your speed between different objects can affect how you experience time. So by using a star date, they said, well, actually, we'll reference it back to the star date of this one star. So that's how they can work out what time it was relative to where they were. Now, it's sort of like something that everyone operates on New Zealand Standard Time or Pacific Time or European Standard Time, and that everyone in the universe operates on that time. So if you're on Mars, you had different number of hours per day, that would still be the time you record things in, as per this standard time. Now the issue arises, as I said, with relativity and gravitational time dilation. Now objects traveling at different relative speeds can experience time differently. They're generally pretty small right now because we're not going fast enough or entering enough sort of massive gravity wells to really affect it. A good example is that after a year in the ISS, the International Space Station, you are 0.01 seconds younger than you would have been if you stayed on Earth. Because by being in space and being further out, traveling at those speeds, your body is experiencing time differently than on Earth. Which you think, wow, 0.01 seconds, that's nothing. But they actually need to calculate this when they're putting up the GPS satellites, because that work through timings. We have to all keep the same timing, and then on Earth have to sort of all line up. And there, even a tiny fraction of a second being out will affect how it locates where you are. So they actually had to, and this was a bit of a joke at the time when someone first raised it, but then they found it was true, they had to actually adjust the timings on GPS satellites to handle this time difference caused by gravitational time dilation. It becomes more important as we develop things to move faster, as different speeds you're going relative to the Earth and to other objects in space will have greater effect on how you experience time. Gravity showed this in the movie, bending a lot of real-world physics, but it sort of gave that idea that what they experienced in a short period of time was a longer period of time for other people. Again, not trying to do any spoilers here. Now, it may seem far-fetched to think about moving a ship that fast, but we have NASA working on breakthrough starshot probes. Now, this is what they announced a year or two ago with Stephen Hawking, and they've since set up some test probes into space to give this a try. The idea is that these first ones are basically little 1 centimeter chips attached to a sail. Now, by firing a laser at the sail, they can accelerate this tiny little 1 centimeter chip to 1/5 the speed of the light within 2 minutes. So they pound, I think, about 100 gigawatts of laser power into the sail. And even though tiny little neutrons are giving it the most tiny fraction of speed increase, the thing is so light and there's so much hitting the sail that it accelerates very, very quickly. So yeah, from 0 to 20 times the speed of light within 2 minutes. Now, a good idea as to how that compares to our current speeds that we're experiencing in space is that our most recent probe to pass Pluto, New Horizons, quite recently went past Pluto, took some great photos. That took 9 years to get there. So it launched 2006, 2015 it passed Pluto. Breakthrough Starshot probe, head to Mars, 3 days. So New Horizons, 9 years, these probes, 3 days. And it means they'll be able to reach to our nearest neighboring solar system, which is about 4 or 5 light years away, in about 20 years. I think it's 4 years light years away. So it'll be there in 20 years' time, and then we'll get the results back from whatever it sees 4 years later. So it's still a 24-year project, but for NASA, 24 years is nothing. They have probes for much longer than that still going out of the universe. So why is this a legal problem? The problem is, how do you define time? Is it Earth-based? Or is it related to the person and what they're experiencing? So if you sold a license for software for X number of months, how do you calculate months? Is that the months on the craft? Talking about if we had manned craft that are going sort of half the speed of light, or do we do it by Earth standards? Like I said, it's a far future issue, but it's something that we'll have to think about in probably the next decade or two as the pace of technology just keeps increasing in development, and just exciting times are ahead. That's probably enough geeking for today. Hopefully you've learned something or thought about something. The purpose of these aren't to provide legal advice, so don't take legal advice from this video, definitely don't, or any of my other videos or blogs that I put up there. It's about making you think, give you some new ideas, perhaps learn something. And hopefully, maybe you enjoyed it, laughed at me a little, that's okay. If you have any legal advice you're after, give us a call here at VirtLaw, or an email or a message in some type. And otherwise, have a good day.